Hello, welcome. So right now I'm going to be talking about the inner child. I did make another video explaining this aspect. This aspect could be considered a chakra. The reason why I'm making this video is because in the last video about the inner child, I don't feel like I included enough information. I did go into it, however, this aspect gets very complicated, and depending on your spirit, it can get kind of crazy. But this is a individual, it depends on your individual nature, it depends on your individual spirit. And this inner child will look different for every single person, okay? So I'm going to try to break this down the best way I can. If you want to read about it, I did make a blog talking about integrating your inner systems. In that blog, all I did was include the ego as its own separate system. The system I should have included, I'm probably going to add it, includes the sacral and the solar plexus as both acting as the ego system, and the inner child is another influence. And then I talked about the higher self. So if you're interested in that, read that blog post that's called Integrating Your Inner Systems. Anyways, so the inner child, this aspect of you is your first awareness. What I mean by that is this is the aspect of you where most of the things that you're influenced by, this is the reason why. The inner child wants to be a part of the whole, doesn't really understand separation. This aspect of you has been more accepting of your past than you are at your current state. This aspect of you is that way is because it sees the whole, the grand scheme of things, and just takes it on as you. And because there's no separation, it doesn't really think so in logical ways. This aspect of you thinks so more in abstract and creative and imaginary ways. This is a very curious, wondrous part of you. Unless you have an inner child that doesn't explore, the abstract. You may have an inner child that is very constructive. And the reason for that is because sometimes when we have certain inner child wounding, the inner child can try to control itself, and this is where the ego is actually formed, because this inner child finds a need to have to protect itself, protect itself in its own world. It's like me against the world, okay? And so it creates this ego thereafter. The ego starts implementing a lot of that influence, that inner child influence, through the sacral, where that's where we feel a lot of guilt and shame for the things that the inner child wants, just craves, just feels it needs in order to feel safe. So the inner child gets us to do certain things. Like, this is where we are inspired or we have aspirations. The inner child is the reason why we go towards our goals, because the inner child is looking for either what it didn't have, what it can have. It wants the next best thing. It wants that nice sparkly thing where it'll grab a lot of attention from other people, because maybe growing up you didn't have all the attention you wanted, right? And it is a direct reflection of what you were influenced by growing up. Like, if you look at the inner child aspect and the conditions you were raised under, you will see what you strive towards as an adult. And because of that, this inner child is its own chakra. Like, it has its own energy, except it's not really a chakra. It's more of like a reflection of what drives you. It's not that this gives you energy. It's that you find a way to create energy to fulfill this space, because it's always going to remind you of your vulnerabilities, where you feel vulnerable, what you can do to feel more safe and secure within yourself. How just it just wants to satisfy this inner child, even though reflection cannot be fulfilled. And so this aspect is an important aspect of you. I know I said I wasn't going to put so much attention towards it on my channel because of the fact that it's just a reflection. It's a reflection of your heart space. So imagine you have your heart, right? Imagine, well, let's not get it, but imagine you have like a whole spectrum of just who you are right here. You know, just this ball of let's say this ball of light, okay? And then you have so much light radiating off of you that it casts a reflection on surfaces. Like let's say on the surface, it casts this reflection. So, but you don't know that you're this ball of light over here just yet, but you see this reflection. So now you think the reflection is you, so you start moving around, looking at this reflection, do all these different things, and it looks quite amazing, right? Because you think this is you, when really you have so much more light. This is just a reflection. You have so much more going on over here, but it's looking at what is possible with this reflection and creates this imagination for this reflection, creates all these ideas. They're not ideals just yet because it hasn't developed that ego, but they're ideas. And this self right here, because it's focused on this reflection, it doesn't see the separation. It just sees this reflection as a part of it. It sees this reflection as the potential of what it's going to experience for itself, you know? And so because there's no separation, the whole experience is just the self. Like the whole experience is just the self. So also think of this. When you think of like children, like babies, they don't even have that self-awareness yet. So they just do things based on how they're feeling, and then anything that happens, like you could slam a door and that baby gets scared, but not because it's like, oh, you slammed the door, I'm scared. It's because that sound is taken as a part of it. Like the baby or the child will see that sound as a part of it, and it'll become frightened by it and think that it's a part of the whole experience. So it's really just a flow of energy. It's just it responding to the overall whole of the experience. Very complicated placement. Like literally this placement is the reason why we are influenced by certain things, why we decide that we want to obtain certain things, like certain things, very particular things. Like the inner child may already have a preference, you know, the inner child usually does. This is why some kids, babies, can have preferences when it comes to food. Maybe it doesn't like the taste of this food over here, but likes this one. And not all babies are created equally. You know, some babies like things other babies don't. Same with your inner child. Your inner child's gonna like doing things and see things that make sense to it that won't make sense to other people. And the inner child aspect is dependent on your individual spirit. Your individual spirit, it really depends on what astral travels you went through. And by astral travels, I mean where you have gone as a spirit, you know, what has happened to your spirit as a spirit, like, or just you as a soul. What happened as a soul when you're retaining more memory through your past experiences as a soul? You know, you're just energy experiencing many different events. And I mean, when we live life, we are doing that. But even after the body expires, you're still doing that. So your soul collects all this data, all this memory. And this is what influences the inner child to have all these preferences. So that's why everyone has different wants, desires, different things that make them feel safe, different preferences, because we all have different travels as a soul. So depending on your soul memory is what you will be influenced to have, maintain, with the ego, because everyone has a different way of expressing that individuality, and that ego is there for us to express the individuality, to create that separation between the influences and the overall whole. It creates that separation for itself, so then it can see that more. And yes, usually the ego wants to fulfill that inner child, because the inner child can be mistaken as the heart. The heart and the inner child, these do go hand in hand a little bit, only because as I made that example, the heart space reflects more of that inner child's light, off of it. So while you're this heart space, you're the center of you is this heart space. At least right now, that is the case. Your reflection of that creates this inner child that you kind of get lost in. Yes, this is subconscious. When I talk about the heart chakra, I've already labeled this as your subconscious mind. I believe other people label this as your subconscious mind too, only because the nature of it can be so unknown, because in your heart, sometimes you don't know how to explain how you're feeling, because you don't really know how to process your feelings in your heart. Sometimes it doesn't make most sense, and you don't see what you feel in your heart as the logical thing to believe in at the time. So you tuck it away in your subconscious, and maybe it'll appear to you in your dreams. And a lot of the times when it comes to the inner child, when it comes to dreams, the inner child is what sees itself as a part of the whole. So in dreams, you do all that inner child stuff. Like for me, I'll do a lot of parkour or flying. If you ever had dreams when you were younger and you were flying, that's a good example of your inner child just being one with everything in that realm of what it can do. Like the inner child loves being limitless, boundless. It likes to be able to do things that it wants to do. Being bounded to things and restricted is more of like a 3D concept. The inner child hasn't yet grasped the 3D concept to understand that the 3D is holding it back from flying, from being able to experience all those inner child dreams. Okay, so, and it does sound delusional. It can. The inner child is the first awareness, and it doesn't make the most sense because of how individual and unique it can be. Okay, but because of this very subconscious section of the mind, these two aspects, the heart and the inner child, are located, it makes this placement very hard to become aware of. It makes it very hard to realize that what you're influenced by, it can either be your heart space or your inner child. But by default, we usually go for the inner child. The inner child gets wounded as a result of so much pressure being put on it. There's so much pressure being put on this inner child aspect because it's now having to be shaped into something it doesn't want to be. As I said, inner child doesn't like to be bounded. It likes to be limitless. It likes to feel like it can do anything. And when the inner child can't, it creates more trauma. Have you ever not given your kid something in the store that the kid wanted? What do? They cried, they screamed, and they had a tantrum, right? That's because this aspect is the same. Like most children are in their inner aspect. They are in that realm. They haven't gained an awareness of who they are yet. They haven't really built on their own moral systems and all of that. The self isn't strong enough to overcome the brightness of that reflection just yet. The child thinks it is this reflection. And so when it sees like things that mirror its own reflection, like, oh, this toy is going to add to my life. Kids don't really think that. They just think, I want the toy. But they do want it because it's like a reflection of the reflection. It's like a reflection of what they're not. It just makes the whole for them, though. It's very interesting. But it can get very subconscious. After growing up, you know, we call this conditioning when we are, our upbringing's a certain way, right? And over time, the inner child aspect, we just grow around all the wounding, you know, the things that we couldn't have, the things that we wanted to have, never got, the safety we wanted to have and we never got, the security that we never felt, now we're going to obtain it. It gets built into this ego. This ego acts as a protector for this inner child eventually, and for your heart too. The ego acts as a protector for the heart too. The ego may illuminate things from the heart, but all it does periodically is put more of that light on the inner child too. You know, the ego puts a lot of what the inner child didn't have into what it strives to get. And so it's not until you center yourself back to your heart. I think it's very important that I recap back to the heart, because this is where we struggle the most when it comes to getting back to our self. When we trace back to the heart, this is where we can be more grounded, but also we can find those subconscious hidden messages tucked away within us. All the things that we may be hiding from ourselves, the things that we don't completely tell ourselves the truth about, the things that we need to be honest with ourselves about when it comes to how we're living our existence, how we feel in our existence. This is all in the heart, okay? And I try to put less importance on the inner child is because I want people to understand that reflection is just a reflection. You walk away from the reflection and you still have you. And it's important to be aware of who you are and where you stand despite what the reflection says, okay? So, hope you like this video. I hope it was very descriptive. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you want to hear more about the inner child, I did write a blog about it. I'll put the link in the description. And I'll put the link for the other inner child video I did in the description as well. You take care.